So the X-Wing pilot helmet, which was originally concepted by Ralph McQuarrie, who created all of the concept artwork for Star Wars, and beautiful artwork it is. Those concepts were taken by costume designer John Mallow, who actually won an Academy Award for his work on Star Wars. He started out as a costume designer with the film Charge of the Light Brigade, and his expertise was actually in military uniforms. So he sort of followed to type with Star Wars and used a lot of leftover military equipment, including the Gentex APH-6 Bravo, which he used to modify an X-Wing pilot helmet. Now, after he'd modified that, he gave it to a fellow named Andrew Ainsworth at Shepperton Design Studios near London, who took those and created copies of it via vacuum forming. And you see the X-Wing pilot helmet in A New Hope, Return of the Jedi, The Empire Strikes Back, and even that same model is, you see it in Rogue One with Blue Squadron, of course, Red and Gold Squadron are there as well. And it's just this very iconic helmet that the moment you see it, you recognize it. And of course, the one that's most often seen is Luke Skywalker, Red 5, played by Mark Hamill. This is a fully restored APH-6 Charlie from the Vietnam conflict. This particular helmet was actually used by my father when he was with VMA 224 and later VMA 533. They were A6 intruder squadrons. And he was actually ground personnel, but he flew on the aircraft a lot, so much that he had his own helmet. That's him. That's my pops. This skinny guy, wasn't he? That's actually when he was with VMA 224 on board CV-52, the USS Coral Sea, an aircraft carrier in the Tonkin Gulf near, of course, Vietnam. That aircraft, Sam Slam, that'll come into focus, that was actually a surface-to-air missile hunter. They went out and hunted surface-to-air missile batteries. And according to my dad, you can see it was quite successful as a SAM hunter. Those are kill marks right there. That aircraft was actually shot down in 1972, the day this photograph was taken. And my dad was doing, I believe he worked in avionics was what his job was. He never really talked about it a whole lot. But yeah, that's my pops. We'll move this guy off to the side so that you can get a better look at the helmet shell itself. Now, it's just a shell. It's a size X large. It's got some missing rivets. It's got some problems with it. It is restorable. It could be restored to original condition, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, which is a ram's horn visor cover, and I'm going to convert this, just as was done by the prop masters for Star Wars A New Hope, into an X-Wing or Rebel pilot helmet, depending on what you want to call it. I'm not sure whose markings I'm going to put it in yet. I guess we'll get to that when the time comes. But I have some other parts to go along with this that will make it slightly more accurate to one of the hero helmets that was used. Among the parts that I have to make this a little bit more accurate is this. And no, it's not the box. It's what's actually in the box. This, as you can see, is the phone housing and ear cushioning assembly, one each, from 1964. Now, these were replacements for the APH-5 series. This one contains the two ear cushion replacements, which, if you look at the hero helmet used by the character Biggs, these are what are inside the helmet. These are actually somewhat hard to find. They're even harder to find in the box. This horribleness right here, this flint coat adhesive, which has split open at the back end, that's sort of garbage, but I'm not going to throw anything away. I never throw anything away. If you do find old military equipment and you intend to use it as props or as parts of props, never throw anything away that you take off of it. Always keep it, because there's always collectors that are trying to restore projects and they can use stuff like this or any of these other components to complete their collection. And you can always sell it to them or trade it for other components. Looking here at the side of the helmet, what you're looking at right now is actually the receptacle for the oxygen mask. Now, this is the fully restored helmet, and what you're looking at is the oxygen mask itself in place. Now, what's holding it in place are oftentimes referred to as butterfly bayonets. Now, this is a type of attachment series that was used for oxygen masks only on the APH-6 series. They are extremely hard to find because most of them were just discarded after they were superseded with a much more efficient and less complex system. They just squeeze together, rotate out, and then you can see they have a little arm, if I can get it to show, that just fits up inside these teeth. And it's adjustable for size, but they just slide into place. Now, on the prop used during the making of the film, this component here, this bit, appears to just be covered in tape. I'm not going to cover it in tape if that's what it is. I'm just going to use sheet styrene. But that's what that is. It's just part of the oxygen mask receptacle. And if you ever find a set of these, buy them. Unless they're too expensive, which they usually are. So I skipped ahead a little bit in this build, and what I've done with the helmet shell is I've taken these off. Now, on the original helmet, if you get one that's complete, there's these little covers right here, and those covers actually hold in the communications equipment and the earpieces. Those are omitted on the X-Wing helmet, so you need to get rid of those, and you're left with a hole. And that hole, I just backed with some sheet styrene and then sanded them over, filled them with some body filler, and then sanded them over. And I've given it a pretty basic sand to get rid of some of the imperfections in the helmet. And then I went ahead and I covered over these receptacles, which I pointed out earlier for the oxygen mask, with just some sheet styrene. And apparently I have a bird's nest in here. And body fillered them up. And one thing to do when you have one of these, if you still have the rubber seal that goes around the outside and it's just really sort of an edge protectant, cover it in tape. That way you don't have to worry about sanding over it or getting paint on it, because you want it to remain black and untouched. So what I have to do now is I need to attach the ram's horns. Now, because I don't have hardware to put in them anymore, well, I do have hardware, but on the X-Wing helmet, where the hardware is at, and we'll go back to look at the original helmet again, where the hardware is at that holds it on, that is completely omitted. That is just because these things were vacuum formed. So all these screws, they're gone. They don't exist anymore. And I need to cover those up, but I still need to attach the ram's horns to this. And before I can attach the ram's horns, and if you do this, what you need to do is you need to cover up these slots that are in here. And you can see that this helmet, the ram's horns attachment for this helmet, are actually different than the ones that I have. The ones that I'm using are actually the earlier mark APH-6 Bravo. This helmet here is an APH-6 Charlie, and there are some differences between them, particularly in the ram's horns themselves. The one you want is this earlier swooping, if you will, design like this. That's one piece, because these are separate pieces here. So you have these guides, which are for the two visors. You need to attach these, which I've done so with 2-part epoxy, and then put some sheet styrene behind these slots and filled them. And I need to go back and do a little bit more filling to them. And then some sheet styrene here to block this off. I haven't done it on this side yet, but I'll get to that because I need this open to be able to get the visor inside once I'm ready to do that part. So I'm going to attach this and then show you how to use these. And you may not have access to these. You may, I don't know. These are what are called Clecos, or spring clamps, or also known as sheet metal clamps. They are a leftover of my time in aviation maintenance. And what they are is a tiny little clamp for holding two pieces of sheet metal together through a screw hole. And how they work is you have these two little grabby bits here and a slot that runs down the center. And when you use these very specific pliers called Cleco pliers, it extends out, and these come together to go through the hole. And then as you release pressure on it, the spring inside pulls it back and spreads these two jaws out, the grabby bits, and then it holds two or more pieces of sheet metal together. And I'm actually going to use these to hold the ram's horns in place while the epoxy sets. Now it's in place, and it's just held in by these Clecos right now. Sheet metal clamps, spring clamps, whatever you want to call them. So now it's actually starting to look like the X-Wing helmet a little bit, because it has that very distinctive shape to it. Now I need to do a lot of filling around this area here and across the back, but part of that's going to be covered over by the Mohawk, and I'll get into making the Mohawk here in a bit. But I need to fill this in and do a little bit of filling there. But I can't fill this in entirely because that's where the visor goes. But for the exterior part of the helmet, it is pretty close to being done, other than the Mohawk and then the front piece that goes here in the visor and the microphone. And then a lot of sanding and filling. If you build one of these, make sure you find your center line, because your center line is going to help you line up your Mohawk. Because the way I built the Mohawk, and the Mohawk is the part that was added on here, the way I'm doing it is actually just creating little slats here made out of 20,000 sheet styrene. And now the dimensions, which are on screen right now, are the dimensions of the Mohawk, starting at the visor cover and then going down to where the visor cover is gone. And what you have is the width is 50 millimeters, and the height here on the visor cover part of it is 20 millimeters, and then it's 45 millimeters in height back here. And I used that contour gauge right there to make sure the contour was right all the way, and then just did some sort of ad hoc supports in between, because most of the strength actually comes from the side panels I still have to put on, and then from this here, which is actually two continuous sheets of 20,000 sheet styrene stacked on top of one another. And it's all held together in super glue right now. And when I get the side panels on, I'll go ahead and I'll putty it all up with some body filler and then sand it, and then it'll just be as strong as it needs to be. But obviously lots of sanding left to go, but that's how the Mohawk is done. And those are the dimensions, and there they are on screen again. Now the dimensions for this Mohawk, the ones that I put on the screen there, right there, those actually came from a Master Replicas copy of the X-Wing helmet, for the Red 5 X-Wing helmet. And those are based on one of the original surviving props. So those are as close as can be to accurate. And they are, of course, they're a bit of an estimate, but none of the helmets were the same. None of the helmets you saw on screen were the same. They were all slightly different in some way. So if there's little variances in dimensions here and there, it's really not going to make much of a difference. And I have decided what markings this is going to be in. I'm going to paint this as Wedge Antilles helmet from A New Hope, because on December 20th, when the new Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker comes out, they announced recently that Wedge himself will be back. So in honor of Wedge coming back, I'm going to go ahead and do this as his helmet. Neato. So here you have the APH-6 Charlie, which this is the restored version, and then the modified APH-6 Bravo to the X-Wing or Rebel pilot helmet in the markings of Wedge Antilles. Now, it's not completely finished because I still have to do some weathering, and I'm still waiting on some decals and markings to show up. As far as the microphone goes for the A New Hope version of this helmet, that's actually a completely separate headset called, I believe it's called a Raycall headset. And it's the same type of headset worn by Han Solo and Luke Skywalker when they're in the gun turrets of the Millennium Falcon. It's that same headset they're wearing. It's also used in Aliens for the Colonial Marines. It's the headset worn by Drake and Vasquez. That's their communication headset, or at least part of it, because that thing's a conglomeration of a lot of different parts. But this is as done as this is going to be for this video. In the next video, part 2 of this, I'm going to have this all finished up, and I'm also going to be doing an unboxing of the brand new Hasbro Black Series X-Wing pilot helmet that's actually in the markings of Red 5, Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill. And I'm going to do a comparison between that out of the box versus this, because some of the measurements on both of these helmets are exactly the same. So we'll be able to compare that helmet against these two and see how close the Black Series helmet is. So thank you for watching. I hope that this was entertaining and that you'll stick around to see the next episode of this 2-part series of converting this thing, which was a massive pain, into an X-Wing or Rebel pilot helmet, depending on what you want to call it. But again, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Consider being a patron. Check all the links below for all the stuff I used to make this helmet and some of the tools that I used and whatnot. And Thank you for watching. Cheers. Bit of a personal story. This flight helmet, I remember this being in our house from when I was a little kid, and I remember when he repainted this thing to be in the markings of VMA 225. Sometime when I was a teenager, he sold this helmet. I don't know why. I think he just wanted to get rid of it, or he didn't care about it. He was never one to be really attached to material things. And years went by, I had forgotten about it, and then I got into collecting aviation helmets, military aviation helmets and headgear. And at the time, I was actually living in Germany, and I got on a website that sold a lot of jet age helmets because I had just started collecting jet age helmets. And this one was for sale. And it was very familiar. I wasn't entirely certain that it was his. And I bought it. I paid a rather embarrassingly large amount of money for this helmet to get it back. And the whole time I didn't know if this was the helmet that had belonged to my dad. And I got it in the mail, took it home and opened it up. And I won't peel it back now because it's been restored. But underneath here, there's some foam lining. And he always wrote his name and stuff. And I peeled back that foam lining, and there was his initials and his last name. And I confirmed that this had been my father's helmet that he flew with in Vietnam, that was sold out of the family and then returned to the family randomly while I was living in Germany. And I was going to give it back to him for Christmas that year, but unfortunately he passed away from a heart attack suddenly before I was able to give it to him. So a little sad, somewhat depressing. But for me, this helmet is, well, it's very much a family heirloom and holds quite a bit of sentimental value for me as well, for a lot of reasons. But yeah, a little personal, slightly depressing. Sorry about that.